I have been sitting at the same bench for over 40 years. I have witnessed every kind of human behavior: regret, fear, anger, even shamelessness. But one morning, a man walked into my courtroom who instantly upended all the habits that years had given me. That November morning when the door opened, the arrogance carried by the person who stepped inside seemed to change the very air in the room. His uniform was impeccable, his steps held a self-assured weight, and his face bore an expression that said, "This is my domain." That man was a police chief charged with enforcing the law, Gabriel Mancini. I had arrived early that day, as I always did. I had gotten my coffee and was reviewing my files. When my clerk Angela approached my desk and said, "Your Honor, there's an unusual name on today's docket," I felt a vague sense of unease. I didn't remember Angela speaking in that tone before. When I pulled the file in front of me and looked, I saw the name, Chief Gabriel Mancini, Contempt of Court. A police chief ignoring an ordinary subpoena was serious enough in itself, but I didn't yet know that there was a much darker picture behind it. The incident had begun 3 months earlier. A young officer, Daniel Cortez, had been accused of using excessive force during a routine traffic stop. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary disciplinary case, but soon, evidence began to disappear. His partner's report had vanished, the dashcam footage had been erased, and witnesses were mysteriously recanting their statements. Under normal circumstances, none of this could be coincidence. The situation caught the attention of federal prosecutors, and a suspicion formed among them. Someone must be interfering behind the scenes in this process. Someone powerful enough to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, like a police chief, for instance. For this reason, Mancini was subpoenaed twice to give sworn testimony, but he complied with neither. He hadn't just defied the court order, he had openly ignored it. That's why he had to be in my courtroom that morning. When the clock struck exactly 9:30, the door opened and Mancini entered. The room fell into a deep silence at that moment. He was taking his steps slowly, acting as if he had come not to be held accountable, but to rule. Behind him walked his lawyer in an expensive suit, with an air of, "I know the rules here." In the back row sat several people in suits and a young woman whose face I didn't recognize. I would soon learn that she was actually FBI agent Julia Bennett. As Mancini walked toward the bench, the mocking expression on his face said it all. This man vividly represented how misusing power for years could become a habit. I had seen such people over the years, but none had dared to look me in the eye and challenge me. "Chief Mancini," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible, "you failed to comply with the court subpoena twice. Do you have an explanation for this?" His answer took everyone's breath away in the courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, a contemptuous smile appearing at the corner of his lips, "I have more important things to do in this city. I can't waste time with bureaucracy." At that moment I understood. This wasn't just a disciplinary violation. This was a challenge. The silence in the courtroom was almost deafening. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen following the insolent words Chief Gabriel Mancini had just spoken. I was looking into his eyes. He wore the same expression I had seen for years on the faces of criminals, bullies, and people intoxicated by power, the expression of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Chief Mancini," I said again, this time the composure in my voice more pronounced. "The reason you are here is that the law requires information from you. No one, regardless of their position, is above this court." But even as my words still hung in the air, he straightened his shoulders and took another step forward. No one approached this close without permission. This was the sharpest form of open defiance I had encountered during my years of service. "Your Honor," he said in a low voice but loud enough for everyone to hear, "in this city, I determine what happens, not you. Not the mayor, not the council, not even you. I'm the one who has his finger on the pulse of the streets. I'm the one who decides which cases matter. I'm the one who understands whether evidence is necessary." The effect these words had in the courtroom was chilling. Angela froze in place. The law students in the back rows looked at each other. They had never imagined hearing such words from a police chief. Some lawyers held their breath, while others were openly disgusted. But the most striking face belonged to the young woman still sitting quietly, FBI agent Julia Bennett. When our eyes met, she nodded slightly, as if to say, "Continue. We needed this for him to reveal his true face." At that moment, I understood that this wasn't just a dispute happening at my bench. This situation was part of a much larger investigation. And Mancini, with his own pride, was walking step by step into a trap being set. "Chief," I said, still maintaining my tone, "this attitude of yours is contrary to your oath of office and the law. I'm asking you again why you failed to comply with the court's subpoena. I want you to tell the truth." But instead of answering me, he turned around and looked at the crowd. He was acting like an actor who had taken the stage in front of an audience. Then he turned back to me and said the sentence that elevated his confidence even further. "I'm the one who keeps this city running, Judge, not you. You just sign papers. I deal with the real world." When he finished speaking, for a moment, I seemed to hear only the sound of my heartbeat. This arrogance was a challenge not only to the laws, but to the democratic order itself. "Chief Mancini," I said, slowly removing my glasses, "I'm going to show you here how the real world works, and this reality is not as flexible as you think." At that moment, Mancini's lawyer jumped up from his seat. "Your Honor," he began hastily, "my client is under pressure." Mancini raised his hand and silenced his lawyer. "I'll speak," he said. He fixed his gaze on me again. "I want you to dismiss this case. Otherwise, I may need to talk to some important people. I know who has what connections in this city, Judge. In fact," he paused, his voice lowering even more, "there's even some information about your family." The room froze. I, with the discipline that years had given me, was trying to keep my breathing steady. The moment he voiced the threat to my family, I knew he had crossed the line. At that moment, I saw Julia Bennett in the back row straighten slightly. Several other agents had also quietly gone into readiness mode. Gabriel Mancini, without even realizing it, was preparing his own end. When Mancini's final threat was heard in the courtroom, time seemed to slow down. That moment was unlike anything I had experienced in my courtroom over the years. This wasn't just a police chief overstepping his bounds. It was a deliberate assault on the heart of justice. But how curious it is that even in the loudest moments, the voice of truth is as calm as a whisper. And my duty was to hear that whisper. "Chief Mancini," I said, slowly standing up. The composure of my voice concealed the anger rising within me. "Your threatening me by implying my family in a courtroom is both unacceptable and criminal. This behavior of yours is an indication not only of professional, but moral collapse." As my words echoed through the room, the color in Mancini's face faded slightly, but his arrogance was still intact. He still thought he could step back. Just then I felt a movement from the back rows. The young woman, FBI agent Julia Bennett, slowly stood up. When the badge on her belt became clearly visible, a murmur spread through the room. Then 3 more agents sitting at different points in the room stood up. Apparently, this was the moment they had been waiting for all along. Mancini, upon grasping the situation, began looking around in confusion. There was no trace left of that arrogant posture. It was as if he had suddenly become an actor whose costume had been taken away. All his power, all his connections, and all his threats, at that moment, carried no meaning. "Chief Gabriel Mancini," said Agent Bennett, her voice carrying a firm and unwavering authority, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, bribery, witness tampering, evidence tampering, and threatening a federal judge." This sentence had the effect of a bomb exploding in the courtroom. Mancini stepped back, his face turned white as a sheet. There was no trace left of the man who had challenged me moments ago. As Agent Bennett moved forward, the other agents surrounded Mancini. As they handcuffed him, Mancini's voice rose, trembling, "This is a mistake. It wasn't supposed to be like this." But it was too late now. Angela, at her desk, had brought her hands to her lips, watching what was happening in disbelief. The lawyers stood motionless, some not blinking from shock. The students in the back rows were looking at each other as if they realized they were witnessing history. As Bennett read Mancini his rights, I took a deep breath. Throughout this entire process, the anger I felt had given way to a heavy calm. Another duty had been completed, another injustice had been exposed. As Mancini was being led out of the room, he looked at me one last time. On his face was the shadow of real remorse for the first time in his life. "Judge," he whispered, "I made a terrible mistake." My response was brief but heavy. "Mistakes are made, Chief, but no one is above the law." When Mancini was taken away, there was a long silence in the room. Finally, Angela asked in a trembling voice, "Your Honor, are you all right?" Leaning against my bench, I nodded slightly. "I'm fine, Angela. But this city was freed today from a burden it has been carrying for years." At that moment, Agent Bennett approached from the back. "This file has been ongoing for 2 years," she said. "Thanks to your patience and impartiality, he was finally able to show his true face." She bowed her head respectfully. And as I sat looking at the courtroom, I knew that what happened today was not just an arrest. It was the beginning of the cracking of a corrupt system. After Mancini was taken away, the courtroom slowly began to empty. But the weight of that moment still hung in the air. It was as if everyone felt that what they had just witnessed was not an ordinary arrest, but the closing of an era. I sat at the bench quietly absorbing what had happened. Justice sometimes comes loudly. Sometimes it's felt like a tremor from within. Today, both had occurred. At that moment, Angela came to my side again. Her eyes were still tearful. "Judge," she said, "I never would have thought I'd witness something like this in all these years." Neither would I have. But the thing called justice most often appears when we least expect it. I had just begun gathering the files on my desk when the door opened slightly. A middle-aged man entered, the tired lines on his face revealing traces of the responsibility he carried. He didn't need to introduce himself. I knew him from many cases in the city. Detective Peter Navarro. "Judge Caprio," he said, bowing his head respectfully, "I need to speak with you." I indicated a place for him to sit. The expression on Navarro's face was heavy, as if he were about to share a burden he had carried for years for the first time. "What happened today is just the beginning," he said. "The web Mancini wove inside is much deeper than you think. For years, many officers trying to do their jobs properly were silenced. Those expecting promotions had their paths blocked. Those who opened investigations were sent to remote districts." Hearing these words pained me, but didn't surprise me. When someone holding power misuses it, it rots the fabric of a city without being noticed. Navarro continued, "We knew extortion was being taken from some businesses, but we couldn't prove it. Those who refused to pay immediately had penalties rained down on their shops. Reports from officers who caused trouble would disappear, and when an investigation was opened, Mancini would step in. Anyone who tried to change things was either silenced or fired." These words made what had happened to young Officer Daniel Cortez 3 months ago even more meaningful. Cortez was just a tool. The real purpose was to protect Mancini's power. "What you did today," Navarro said, "was the breaking point this city has been waiting for years. Without your stance, even the FBI would have struggled to reveal his true face." His words were heavy, but there was a glimmer of hope in them. Just then the door knocked again. This time a young woman entered, Officer Adriana Lopez. Her eyes were slightly red. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling, "I wanted to thank you." I paused at that moment. "For what, officer?" "Today, you restored our faith in the badge. For a long time, most of us were afraid to speak about what we saw. Chief Mancini's power was so great that we thought if we spoke up, we'd lose everything." In Lopez's eyes was a helplessness that had been suppressed for years, and at the same time, a fresh courage. The approving expression on Navarro's face confirmed this as well. "Officer Lopez," I said in a soft voice, "the truly difficult thing is having the courage to stand up to injustice. You did that today." Lopez bowed her head and left, thanking me. Then Navarro stood up as well. "This is just the beginning," he said. "But today was a turning point for this city." After he left, the courtroom was empty. It was as if even the walls had felt the weight of the day. I took a deep breath. The sky was gray, but there was a slight brightness inside me. At that moment I sensed what happened today was not just the downfall of one man, but the first step in the reshaping of a system. When I entered the courtroom the next morning, I felt the silence left behind by yesterday's storm. Sometimes one understands the soul of a city from the weight its buildings carry. That day, even the walls seemed to have lightened a bit. But I knew the real change would occur outside, in the corridors of the police station and in the minds of the people. Before the day's first hearing began, there was a knock on my door. A man who still carried a fresh seriousness entered. Captain Harris, the city's new interim police chief. It had been only a few hours since he had taken over the position, but the expression on his face made it feel like a responsibility he had been waiting for had finally fallen into place. "Your Honor," he said in a firm voice, "after yesterday's incident, we are taking rapid steps to reorganize the department." I gestured for him to sit. The clarity in his words showed that a system that had been in the shadows for years was slowly coming to the surface. "First," he continued, "we've launched emergency audits in all units. Complaints that have been ignored until today are being reopened. The structure of the Internal Affairs Board will be completely changed. We're establishing an anonymous tip line to remove the pressure on officers." When I heard these words, a spark of hope ignited within me. The fear and distrust that had accumulated silently for years were perhaps being cleaned up systematically for the first time. Harris pulled a file from his pocket. "These are new policy drafts," he said. "Mandatory body cameras for every officer, transparency in investigations, and the establishment of a civilian oversight commission. Federal observers are coming in 2 weeks." As I listened to him carefully, I thought, the way to change a city is to first make the truths visible. What began the moment Mancini's mask fell was now an irreversible transformation. After Harris finished speaking, he stood up. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "the determination you showed in yesterday's hearing was a signal for us. You reminded us how we should do our jobs." Then he left the room. Minutes later, the door knocked again, this time in a quieter tone. The person who entered had a familiar face, young police officer Daniel Cortez. The accusations directed at him in the early days had left a weight in the depths of his eyes. But today there was something else in his gaze, a hope close to relief. "Your Honor," he said, swallowing, "I wanted to thank you. My family, especially my wife Elena, slept peacefully for the first time in a long time last night." I indicated a place for him to sit. "The evidence," he said, "the missing footage, the altered statements, it's all been uncovered. The FBI confirmed that Mancini specifically manipulated them. I'm now completely exonerated." When I heard these words, a knot inside me loosened. This young man's future had been attempted to be darkened because of one person's interests. But today, seeing that the truth finds its way, even if slowly, reminded me why the thing called justice exists. "Cortez," I said with a smile, "sometimes justice comes late, but when it comes, No power can stop the weight it carries. The young officer's eyes welled up. "My wife, Elena, wrote you a letter," he said, reaching for a small envelope from his folder. "Thanks to you, our family was saved from falling apart." I took the letter in my hand but didn't open it. At such moments, what matters more than words is the intention behind those words. Before Cortez got up, he spoke once more. "When I returned to work today, I didn't feel like a monster when I entered the station. For the first time, I had a reason to be proud." As he left the room, I watched after him. The healing of a city sometimes begins with a single person, sometimes with one person's restoration of their dignity. Outside, the sky was still gray, but the brightness that had begun inside me was growing. This wasn't just a cleanup, this was the birth of a new order. A few days had passed since Mancini's arrest, but the heavy atmosphere hanging over the city had given way to a strange lightness. People seemed to breathe more deeply even as they walked the streets. The elimination of the rot within a city can sometimes even be felt in the morale of the people. That day, justice had stirred not only within a courtroom, but within an entire community. As I was preparing for one of the morning hearings, Angela opened my door. "Your Honor," she said, "someone wants to meet with you." The person who entered had a face I had only seen before in news bulletins, a local business owner, Mateo Alvarez. His face bore the lines of years of stress. "Please come in, Mr. Alvarez," I said, indicating a place for him to sit. Like people who don't know where to begin, he first clasped his hands together. "Your Honor, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but for years they've been bleeding money from my business. If it weren't for the extortion I paid, my shop would have grown long ago. When I delayed payment, I was immediately fined. I always kept quiet so as not to risk my business." When I heard this confession, a weight settled within me. Mancini's power had manifested itself not only in the police station corridors, but in the people's bread, in their livelihood. Alvarez continued, "Last night I got a call from the police station. I was told I'm safe now. An investigation has been opened. For the first time in years, I feel like no one can silence me." At the end of his words, his eyes brightened slightly. For the first time, standing before me was a person carrying hope instead of fear. After Alvarez left, the room became quiet again, but shortly after, the door knocked again, this time more quickly. The person who entered was Captain Harris. His face had a serious but determined expression. "Your Honor," he said, "I wanted to update you on the latest developments." He put the file on my desk. Inside were reports that had been altered under Mancini's orders, recovered copies of missing camera footage, and statements from silenced officers. "These documents," Harris said, "are enough for us to clean up the department from top to bottom. Federal teams are reviewing every single file. Very soon a new training program will be implemented. We'll establish a system that strengthens officers' connection with the community, not like the old days." I listened to him carefully. Every word showed that not just a structure, but a mentality was beginning to change. Harris paused briefly and continued, "Your Honor, most of the officers are talking about the attitude you showed at the hearing. The perseverance you displayed that day helped break the fear that had been ingrained in us for years." When I heard these words, I felt the weight that had been accumulating on my shoulders for years lighten a bit more. As Harris was about to leave, he paused for a moment. Mancini didn't just violate laws, he also stole people's faith in justice. But now, people are beginning to trust again. After he left, I took a deep breath. As someone who has listened to all kinds of human stories at the bench for decades, I know this. The impact of justice is sometimes not immediate. Sometimes it grows silently, permeates the soul of cities. Before the afternoon hearings began, Angela stuck her head through the door. "Your Honor, there's someone else outside. They want to speak with you." A young woman entered, carrying a small notebook in her hand. She had a simple smile, but a deep seriousness could be felt in her gaze. "I'm Sophia Mendez," she said. "I'm a member of the Volunteer Justice Watch Group in the city," she continued. "Recent events have mobilized the public. People now want transparency, accountability. We want to be part of this process, too. The reason I'm here today is to thank you. You," she said, looking into my eyes, "gave us courage. People are talking now. Awareness is beginning to replace fear." At that moment, it was as if a new light filled the courtroom. This light came neither from Mancini's power nor from fear. This was a city awakening. As Sophia left, the room became quiet again. But now that silence was not the silence of dark suppression, but the silence of a beginning. And as I sat alone at the bench, I thought this: sometimes the transformation of a city begins with a decision, sometimes in a courtroom, sometimes with a single person saying, "Enough is enough." Today, this city was in a slow but determined awakening. A week had passed since Mancini's arrest. The change in the city could now be felt not only in conversations, but even in people's gazes. It was as if a fog that had been invisible for years had lifted, and the streets had found a new breath. But behind this quiet change, there were still unfinished matters. Justice doesn't end only with the capture of the guilty. The wounds opened by that crime must also be healed. That day, as I was walking toward my courtroom in the afternoon, Angela stopped me. "Your Honor," she said, "a reporter from the city newspaper wants to meet with you. He's requesting an interview." I approach such situations with caution. The press can illuminate the truth, but it can also become a lens that magnifies misunderstandings. Still, it seemed the time for speaking had come. The reporter was a young man, but seriousness had settled on his face. "Your Honor," he said, "they say the city is starting to breathe again. How do you assess this?" I told him the most fundamental truth I had learned over many years. What makes a city grow is not just its roads, buildings, or budget. What makes a city grow is the people living in that city's faith in justice. If that faith is lost, no structure can keep that society standing. The reporter nodded, took notes, thanked me, and left. But the most unexpected visit of the day had not yet come. At the end of the hearing, there was a knock on the door, and someone carrying a subtle humility on their chest entered. Elena, Daniel Cortez's wife. She had a small box in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, her voice gentle but determined, "I couldn't help but speak with you face to face." I indicated a place for her to sit. Elena continued, "My husband had been feeling guilty for a long time. Because of Mancini's pressure, he had distanced himself from both his family and himself. You enabled him to believe in himself again. Our family was on the verge of falling apart, but now we're whole again." Her words were so sincere that even the silence of the room deepened. She extended the box toward me. "This is a small thank you," she said. When I opened the box, a simple pen emerged from inside. This sentence was engraved on it: "Truth, even if delayed, finds its way." The pen was a small gift, but its meaning was very large. Sometimes the most valuable thing in a person's life is a decision that gives them hope again. After Elena left, before my thoughts could gather, the door was knocked once more. This time Captain Harris entered. On his face was the expression of someone bringing news, but not knowing how to carry its weight. "Your Honor," he said, "federal prosecutors shared the final report today. The scope of Mancini's crimes is even broader than we estimated." He left a file on my desk. Inside were dozens of documents, from bribery networks to manipulated investigations, from false reports to abuse of authority. "Each of these cases will be reopened," Harris said, "and, thanks to the hearing in your courtroom, Mancini's threats can no longer silence anyone." A city's purification from corruption was possible not only by handcuffing one man, but by having the truth heard by everyone. And today, the truth was being heard this clearly for the first time. Just as Harris was leaving, he paused for a moment and added, "Your Honor, this city thought the decision you made that day wouldn't matter. But we were wrong. Thanks to you, we learned to believe again." These words became one of the heaviest but most honorable moments of the 40 years I had spent at the bench. When the day ended, the courtroom emptied. When I looked outside through the window, there was a light breeze in the streets. And what that breeze carried was not only air, it was like the sound of a city being reborn. 2 weeks after Mancini's arrest, the city looked completely different. The change was still fragile, still new and cautious, but it was felt. People looked at each other more carefully, police officers acted more transparently in the streets, and the invisible tension that had circulated in the long corridors of the station for years was giving way to something else, that delicate but powerful feeling called hope. This hope arose not only from one man's downfall, but from the truth finally being heard. That day, as I entered the courtroom, there was a strange calm within me. It was as if a low noise that had been playing in the background for years had suddenly stopped, leaving only silence. But this silence was peaceful. This silence was a city's effort to hold on to itself again. When the morning session ended, Angela opened the door slightly. "Your Honor," she said, "someone from the federal team wants to meet with you." The person who entered was familiar. FBI Agent Julia Bennett. Unlike her determined state at the hearing, today she wore a calmer, more human expression. "Judge," she said, "the official report of the investigation has been completed. Mancini admitted to all charges. He is expected to receive at least 8 years in federal prison." This sentence showed that the threatening voice that had echoed in the courtroom was now only a memory. Power, when in the wrong hands, can create earthquakes, but in the right hands, it brings justice. Agent Bennett pointed to the last page of the report. Most importantly, officers who had been silenced for years have started to speak. Your attitude at the hearing gave them a confidence they hadn't seen in a long time. She left with thanks. As the day continued after her, the door knocked once more. This time, Chief Harris entered, carrying a mixture of pride and responsibility on his face. He was no longer just the interim chief, he had been officially appointed. "Your Honor," he said, "new regulations have gone into effect in the department. All officers are being put through community-oriented training. Body cameras have actively started being used. The Transparency Commission held its first meeting. For the first time in years, people are trusting the police." As I listened to these words, I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about how a small spark that began in a courtroom had spread to an entire city. Harris continued, "None of this would have happened without the determination you showed at the hearing. I thank you on behalf of all of us." After Harris left, the room became quiet again, and a few minutes later, the door was knocked again. This time someone entered with slow steps. Detective Peter Navarro. He had a slight smile on his face. "I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye," he said. "For years we saw that something we didn't believe in is real today. Justice still has meaning." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small badge. "This," he said, "is a reminder for everyone who served in Mancini's shadow. We forgot that we need to serve this badge worthily. You reminded us again." He left the badge on my desk and quietly departed. I had now reached the end of the day. There was no one in the room. As I sat alone at the bench, I thought about what had happened. A police chief had abused power for years. Officers had been intimidated. The public had been frightened. The truth had been silenced. But then one day, he stepped into a courtroom, and in that same room, with his own arrogance, he prepared his own end. For me, the meaning of that day was not just an arrest. That day, I saw that justice is fed not only by laws, but by people's courage. I looked outside through the window. The city lights had started to come on. People were walking in the streets. Children were running and playing with laughter. Life would continue to flow if there was justice. And I quietly thought, in a city, it is the law that governs order. What keeps the law standing is honesty. And even one person defending honesty is enough to challenge the darkness. That day, justice won. It was a quiet but determined victory. And that victory was felt not in a courtroom, but in the heart of an entire city. I am Judge Caprio. Remember, sometimes the right decision is not written in books. You feel it in your heart. But when corruption is involved, it's not emotions that speak, it's the law. And the law says very clearly, no one, no position, no power is above the law. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. Like the video, turn on notifications, and write in the comments which city you're watching from.